Well, hi everyone, Shaun Humphries here. Welcome to this edition of the All Things Retirement video series. In this edition of the video series, we're going to talk about retirement and specifically the RRSP and RRIF beneficiary designations. So it's an area that can get confusing for people, and so what I'd like to do is just give you a basic primer on how beneficiary designations work, and hopefully it'll give you some basic direction when you're looking at this area in your own retirement income plan. Now again, we always talk about our model when we start these presentations around retirement planning. Of course, you are at the center of that model, and we want to make sure that as we go through a retirement process that it's comprehensive. Retirement's not just about your investment portfolio, not just about your pensions or tax planning. It's about defining purpose and vision for what retirement looks like for you, cultivating health, energy, vitality, being clear on your goals, and understanding how your pension plan works. There's a whole bunch of questions that tie into that. Investment planning, how much do you have to take from your portfolio every year to get you the cash flow that you require? Of course, tax planning is a critical area, and of course, estate planning and beneficiary designations obviously tie specifically into the estate planning area. Well, hopefully when you retire, if you have a partner, you'll look like this as you're walking along the beach. Maybe it's not always free time and leisure time, but that's an important part of transitioning to retirement. And obviously, peace of mind is a big part of the process. And so we look at RRSP and RRIF beneficiary designations. It's really about looking after loved ones, but also speaking to the issue of creating legacy in our planning. So when we look at beneficiary designations, really the question is going to come down to, do we list our estate as a beneficiary or an individual? And of course, it's situational specific. It really depends on whether you have a spouse or partner, which drives a lot of those decisions. And so let's look at the basic mechanics of this, and I'll just kind of draw a schematic that you can take a look at and just follow along with me as we look at both the estate or the individual as a beneficiary on your RRSP/RRIF accounts. Okay, what you see here is a bit of a schematic, and I've got at the top of this chart, I've got the RRSP and RRIF area. And so just work with me a little bit here. So we've got the RRSP account or the RRIF account that's set up. And when we go through the account application with our financial institution, one of the questions that's going to come up is, who do you want to list as your beneficiary? Now, if I've got a spouse or a common law partner, and if this is a situation where it's a first to die situation we're thinking about. So I've got an account, let's say an RRSP account, and I'm considering what I want to do with that account in a first to die if I predecease my spouse. And at that point, I can list either my spouse as a beneficiary directly on the plan, or I can list the estate as a beneficiary. Now, the overwhelming majority of people, of course, will list their spouse as the beneficiary of the plan. So in a first to die situation, upon death, that account will transfer directly to the surviving spouse. Now, one of the big benefits attached to that transfer is if you list a beneficiary designation on the account, and that account clearly outlines that your partner or spouse is a beneficiary, that asset passes free the estate. It doesn't have to go to the estate, it can go directly to that partner. And usually with most financial institutions, all that's required is a notarized copy of a will and a copy of the original copy of a death certificate, or a notarized copy of a death certificate. Now, the big benefit, it's quick, it's administratively not very intensive at all, and the account just rolls over directly to that surviving spouse and keeps it out of probate. The big advantage, of course, with probate, in our province, the probate costs would be around $7 per thousand. So if I've got, a $100,000 portfolio, then there's $700 worth of costs there for the portfolio. So it keeps that probate cost down. It's very time efficient. There can be situations where you'd list the estate as a beneficiary. Now, those are less common situations, but sometimes people will put in trusts, what are called testamentary trusts, in their will, and the intent of those trusts is to sort of provide guidelines around how that money is to be used. And so you'll see families look at RRSP assets and other assets, and rather than going directly to a listed individual as a beneficiary, they'll pass it through the estate, and in that estate there might be a trust for a spouse. The money goes to that trust, and then the trust outlines how the money is to be distributed. For some families, it might be access to income and maybe access to capital for specific needs or purposes. And so for some families, there may be some caps or collars they want to put on that account to control how assets are to be used. That's a very uncommon situation for most families looking at beneficiary designations for a spouse. Okay? So one of the things to keep in mind when you're going through this exercise is make sure that your will does not conflict with your beneficiary designations. In other words, you can have a situation where you've made an intentional outline under the terms of your account agreement as to what the beneficiary designation is. And then after the fact, let's say you're meeting with your lawyer and you say something different, specifically related to your RSP accounts about who the beneficiaries are. Well, in that situation, your will supersede your previous direction to your financial institution. So you want to make sure that you're always reviewing your estate plan and your beneficiary designations, your will plan at the same time. Okay, pretty straightforward situation there. Pretty common that you'll list a spouse as a beneficiary. Now, in this scenario, we've got a last to die. You have no surviving partner or spouse. You've got an RRSP or RRIF account. And often the question is going to be, do I direct this money to my children or do I direct the money to the estate? Well, one of the benefits of having your kids as contingent beneficiaries or beneficiaries on the registered accounts, the RRSP RRIF, is that, again, it reduces probate. In other words, those assets can pass free of the estate, go directly to the kids. There's no probate costs. Again, it's administratively pretty straightforward. Again, death certificate, notarized copy of the will. Typically, most institutions, they'll release the assets. Now, that may not always be the best situation. So you see with a lot of estate planning, in a last to die situation where both mom and dad are gone now, it's pretty common to have the estate as the beneficiary of the plan. Now, why would you do that? Well, one reason might be for tax purposes. So again, when you have a beneficiary designation other than a spouse or partner, as an example, in this situation, there's no requirement for the financial institution to hold back tax. So they'll release some monies back directly to the children. And then a few months later, the executor is filing the tax return. Of course, there's a recognition that tax is owed, and now they have to go back to the beneficiaries to get that tax. You really don't want to put your executor ideally in that situation. Now, if it's just one beneficiary, that's one child or two children, and they really get along well together, the kids get along, well, maybe you can take some shortcuts, strategize about how you're going to pay the tax after the fact. But for most families, they'll tend to default towards the estate because they want to make sure there's no surprises. They want all the assets to go to the estate, including the RSP and RRIF assets. When the executor is going through the tax calculation, then at that point they know how much CRA has to be paid. They'll remit that money to CRA, and then once all creditors are looked after, CRA is usually the largest one, then they'll release the assets to the beneficiaries. Now, the downside to that strategy, of course, is that, yeah, you've done a systematic, very thoughtful job around tax, but now those assets are subject to probate. It does take a little bit longer to deal with an estate that has to go through the probate process. But most importantly, you want to look at the will plan. So again, just like with the, let's say, a spousal trust, where there's a surviving spouse, you could have a situation where the individuals listed trusts for the benefit of their children or grandchildren or charities or organizations, and so they actually want the money to go to the estate and then for the will plan to direct how that money is to be used. Yes, there's probate. It can slow things down going through the estate, but ultimately if there's a long-term game plan in place on how those assets are to be used through the will, then often money going to the estate is the best option. Okay? Taxation, it's the same either way. Whether you pay money directly to the children or you pay money to the estate, either way the tax liabilities are going to be the same. So if you want caps and collars and controls, then you want the RSP/RRIF beneficiary designation to be the estate, and then your will direct how those monies should be looked after. If you want to keep it really simple and you trust your kids will make good decisions and they won't have a lack of due diligence in terms of how they deal with the estate issues after the fact, then you can have your kids listed. Again, not that common. It's not as common. You don't want the reduction of estate or probate costs to to be always the overwhelming driver of these decisions. You want to be very thoughtful about how you handle these beneficiary designations. Well, as you can see, the whole issue of beneficiary planning for your registered accounts is not super straightforward. It's pretty straightforward as it relates to if you have a surviving spouse or partner, but once you're in a situation where it's a last to die, you want to be very thoughtful about your planning. Now, estate planning is just one piece in an overall plan. And you know, as you watch this video, if you're getting closer to retirement, you may even already be retired, and you want to get a sense, a very clear sense of whether you're tracking in the right direction, then you want to give serious consideration, I think, to working with a retirement coach. What's a retirement coach do? They get to know your dreams and goals and concerns. They assess your current financial position, and through that they can identify gaps or opportunities that might be available to you, and then of course develop an action plan. And once that action plan is put in place, to provide encouragement and accountability to implement that plan, and of course the review and fine-tuning process is really critical. So if you haven't thought about coaching in this area before, it's something that I encourage you to take a look at. We've developed something called a gap analysis, which is a computer simulation around retirements. It's a way of trying to make retirement planning real from a numbers and a visual standpoint, and we use the gap analysis to provide people with clarity and confidence and peace of mind that they're tracking in the right direction. They know exactly the kind of strategies that they should be utilizing. So if you're interested in getting more information about our retirement coaching programs, here's the contact information. Humphries@asante.com, 977-8049, area code 204, of course, is the phone number, and of course our website, ShaunHumphries.com. Anyway, all the best with your wealth planning and your retirement planning. And as you take a look at this area, obviously lots of information to sort of get a handle on, but be sure to visit our website as well as our YouTube channel, All Things Retirement, to get more information on this important topic. You take care. Bye-bye.